Hi, Jonathan.
Afternoon, Sue.
This is a really important topic, isn't it? You and I, we've been involved in SIs, and everybody will be at some point. How has how we deal with them been changed over the last few years?
Well, I think there's been quite a few changes in how we've dealt with SIs. I think they've become more prevalent. I think that's one thing to note. So we see more of them going through any particular department. And there's quite a few reasons, of course, for that as well. But I think what we're trying to do is spend more time learning from them and trying to see more potential adverse events as something we could learn from, and then they're turning into serious incidents and serious incident investigations. So there's been that change.
There's also the thing that the media seems to latch onto them too. So sometimes they become very high profile.
They do. I mean, I couldn't give you any data on like how much higher profile they have, but I know when they're in the media, they're very emotive, and particularly those who are involved in them, the professionals, get quite damaged, I think, by actually how they're being portrayed in the media.
So I was the scrub nurse. I was also the sister in charge that night. It was a night shift, an emergency case, and I accidentally handed some unsterile K-wires to the surgeon, who then drilled them into the patient's bone. The next morning, I went into the matron's office to say exactly what had happened. And I was told to go home and write a letter of apology to the consultant. I was tired, I was devastated, I was distressed. I drove home at a time when children are going to school. I was unsafe.
I recall a recent incident where a baby unfortunately received an overdose of an albumin infusion that made the baby a bit unwell. And I was the consultant responsible for the team, and this happened between the registrar and the nurses, and I had to deal with the incident. So this was quite difficult because I had to support the parents as well as support the baby and look after my team.
I have had serious incidents that have been related to child death, often unexpected, and managing your own emotions around that death and also the emotions of the family at the time can be really difficult. To then find out it's being investigated as a serious incident, I think can be quite stressful. You are inherently going to worry that maybe there was something you didn't spot, or there's something that you didn't do that would have changed the outcome. And the fact that it's being investigated makes you wonder if you're somehow at fault or culpable. Most of the time, that's not why these are being investigated. It's the wider circumstances and the sort of multifactorial process. And the learning that comes out of them can be really helpful from it. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind at the time.
I guess one of the toughest things that we have to deal with as doctors is being involved with a serious incident, whatever our part is in it. What's expected if a trainee suddenly finds themselves in that position?
First things you'll know is you'll be notified that people will need a statement from you. And it might be that you've written brilliant clinical notes, and that's great, but I think it's always helpful if you think this is likely to be a clinical incident, or you know it is, to keep some notes for yourself about what you recall about that day, because you'll be asked to write a statement. And also to make sure that you've got the investigating panel will go away and look at all the bits of evidence that they've got and write a report about that. And once the report's generated, learning points will come out through the department, but you should also be fed back to directly about what the outcome of the SI is and given a copy yourself.
And you made a very good point that we will all be involved in SIs. I've certainly been involved in SIs, and it is horrible. And that moment when that email arrives saying, please will you write a report, can be terrifying, can't it?
And absolutely, but I would kind of hope that you wouldn't get that as your first point of contact. And sadly, we know that for many of us, that has been your first point of contact. But I think it is better to have a face-to-face discussion or a phone call. And I've certainly called a couple of trainees who I know are about to be asked to provide a statement. So I would hope that email doesn't just drop without any warning. But if it does, as I said, don't panic. The focus of SIs has changed recently to be looking much more at a systems-based issue rather than apportioning blame to an individual. So we shouldn't be worried or scared about them. It's about looking at where the system might have not worked as well as it should have done, and trying to make systems changes.
And what's the timeline? Is there a timeline for these investigations?
They can be long, particularly if it's a big SI. So certainly the one that I've just written for the department has taken about 5 months from start to finish. And the difficulty, of course, as a trainee is that you might have moved on. And so we've had to kind of, we know everyone's contact details. You should still be fed back to. But it can be really tricky if you've moved on somewhere else if the support hasn't then followed you, or you suddenly get the SI report and you're working in a completely different place. It can be really challenging.
And then on your ARCP, it says something about declare if you've been involved in an SI. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So it's on the Form R, isn't it, to declare whether you've been in an SI or had complaints, etc. And it is important, but that's not necessarily intended to be there as a penalty for scrutiny, but for TPDs to know who's going to need some extra support. And certainly for trainees that have been involved in an SI, an ARCP panel want to make sure that they've got some robust support in place locally and to be able to help with that if not.
And that you've reflected in your portfolio that you've been involved.
Absolutely.
So there was a Never event some years much later, and I recognised the need for immediate staff support, accessible support for staff who are involved in SIs. And so I founded CSOS. And initially that was safe physical spaces where staff could be supported and peer support, trained peer supporters.
Carol, you run CSOS, which provides support to staff who are going through serious incidents. Can you tell us a little bit about what the crucial parts of the service you provide are?
Okay, reassurance, absolutely vital for anyone going through an incident, and really getting that help as soon as possible. So come and get help, find out who you can get support for. Please don't leave an incident without contact details, and ensure that anyone involved has a contact detail, someone that they can call. Things to look out for are flashbacks. If you're having lots and lots of flashbacks, some flashbacks is normal, but if you're having them repeatedly and they're bothering you and they're not going away, they're not reducing in number, then a good idea to get some professional help.
And what sort of professional help can doctors and nurses get?
So psychology services, so your EAP, employers assistance providers. You can go to PHP if you're a doctor. That's a very good service, and that's confidential. It's important that these services are confidential, but reassurance from your peers is also probably really very vital and doesn't cost anything.
And of course, for doctors, the MPS or the MDU will read through your statement for you.
Yes.
And the BMA will come to any meetings that you have to attend. So that's a very good source of support.
Absolutely.
I was very lucky the first time I was involved in an incident that I had a consultant who took me to one side, gave me time to review the incident with the notes, and supported me writing that statement and advised me to send it to the Defence Union. Having that support gave me a better grounding to deal with them subsequently. But I've had a lot of informal support from colleagues advising me of the process when I wasn't previously aware, sort of hashing out my own emotional feelings on it. And there is a lot of support available from the professional support unit and places like that as well. The other thing I would say is try not to worry that it's a problem with you. It's very easy because you have to declare these on your ARCPs and things like that, to worry that it's your fault, and the investigation will look into all of the factors and learning will come out of that. But actually having these on your ARCP isn't a problem. You just have to reflect on them, say what you've learned from them if it's relevant. And actually I found that the ARCP panels have been really supportive and supported me with having gone through these processes.
I think the first thing I want to say is that you should forgive yourself. And I think that's really quite important because you carry a lot of guilt, and that's a professional response to feel guilty, to feel, to worry that you've made a mistake. But it's important that you forgive yourself, because if you don't, then it's difficult to move on to the next stage, which is really the learning, which is important, which is vital. I mean, they say, to err is human, and to forgive is divine. But I think to reflect and learn is what is divine.
So as a profession, I think we need to talk about it more. There's a lot of stigma that's surrounding it. You feel like you have to justify yourself and say, oh, I was involved in these SIs, but it wasn't my fault, or the outcomes weren't related to what I did. I think actually we have to accept that we are humans, things will go wrong. The system that we work in is under a lot of pressure, and talk about it so that we can all learn from it, as well as supporting our colleagues that are going through it. And if we're able to talk about it, we will know who are struggling a bit more with these processes as they're going through it. I think the process should be more transparent, and we should do better training for our trainees as they're going through the process, so that when it comes, you're not suddenly hit with something that you have no idea how to deal with and no idea who to go to for support.
So the process has changed over the last few years to something called the PSIRF, Patient Safety Incident Response Framework. And if you want to read about it, there's loads of pages you can read on the NHS website. But in short, the whole point is it's supposed to become more systems focused, rather than feeling like you're apportioning blame or you're seeking out a root cause. So it used to be based on something called root cause analysis, looking for what was the root cause that had caused the harm, so to speak. And it's supposed to have moved away from that and become much more systems focused. What is it about the system that we work in that has gone wrong? And that makes the assumption that as healthcare professionals, you go to work to do a good job. You're highly trained, your intentions are good. And if something has gone wrong, that isn't necessarily your fault, but something about the system that you work in has failed. And therefore, we should hopefully feel a little bit more comfortable about contributing to SIs, because actually we're looking at the systems around you. And I'd really encourage people, particularly trainees, they often spot things before maybe their consultants do, and actually don't wait for an SI to try and make changes. If you see something in your workplace that doesn't work well, or you think is a patient safety risk, then do something about it rather than waiting for an SI. Be proactive in highlighting those things, getting involved in QI and trying to make changes before the system fails. And it's looking at what is the learning for the department, for the NHS in general, around what's happened to this particular patient that we can move forward with.